Listen up, get ready, I'm not gonna take no more. There's a revolution, a revelation going on in my soul. Buckle up, get ready, we're not gonna sit back.
Hey, we're back with more live from the Heartland for the week of September 2nd. And it always gives me a lot of pleasure to bring on someone who's been on the show before. And this time it's the one, the only Peter Hudis, who is a professor at Oakton College here in Skokie and Des Plaines. And last time you were on, we talked about your book about Frantz Fanon, the African intellectual and activist that a lot of us back in the 60s read. I'm sure you've been doing a lot of stuff since then. You got a hold of me recently around an event that you're involved with, a tour of Ukrainian and Russian anti-war activists opposed to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And you got an event coming up at Loyola. Why don't you tell us all about it, Peter?
Thank you very much. We hear a lot of debate and discussion, of course, from various points of view about this horrible invasion of Ukraine by Putin over the past year and the resistance of Ukrainians to it, for pro or con from different vantage points. But one thing we rarely hear are voices of Ukrainians, especially left-wing Ukrainians, especially democratic socialists in Ukraine, who oppose Putin's invasion. They don't support, however, the neoliberal policies of the Ukrainian government, and they certainly don't support many of the policies of the Western European countries and the United States, but they do support Ukraine's fight against Russia's invasion. We also don't hear a lot very often in the U.S. media or in the U.S. left, in addition for that matter, about the voices of opposition within Russia. That is, there's huge numbers of people who have left Russia since the invasion began, and there's huge numbers of people large numbers who oppose the war, but their voices often aren't heard. This event at Loyola, which is Tuesday, September 5th at 6:30 p.m. in Damen Student Center Cinema, which is 6511 North Sheridan Road, Damen Student Center Cinema. It's the new building that they built there, right when you walk into the entrance at the Lakeshore campus on the right side, is going to be different in that it's bringing together both Ukrainians who are supporting the struggle against Putin's Russia and Russians who are supporting Ukrainian struggle against Russia, and on the same platform together. And that's a very unusual sort of event. And I think it's going to be a really exciting meeting. And there's going to be 3 speakers, 2 from Ukraine, 1 from Russia, and all of them serious scholars as well as activists.
And one of them is in the States, usually, at Tulane, Denis Bondar.
Yes, Denis Bondar is a professor of physics at Tulane University. He's also a member of Socialistny Ruch, which is a Ukrainian democratic socialist organization connected with the journal Spilna, which means commune in English. And this is the most important left-wing journal that is published in Ukraine. It's been published there for about 3 or 4 years now. And these are social activists in the feminist movement, in the labor movement in Ukraine, in the socialist movement in Ukraine, small as it is, but nevertheless a significant force in a very, very serious theoretical journal. He is also connected with that tendency. The other 2 speakers are also from Ukraine, is Hanna Perikota, who is now in Switzerland at the Swiss-based Committee in Solidarity with Ukrainian People. She is a researcher at the University of Lausanne. And the 3rd speaker, somebody who some of your listeners may know about, Ilya Butrykskis, who is an exile from Russia. He's written a very, very important book called Dissidents Among Dissidents, Ideology, Politics, and the Left in Post-Soviet Russia. He's considered one of the most serious radical left commentators and theorists within Russia, who unfortunately was forced to leave the country because of the political repression meted out towards critics of Putin's regime from the left, certainly.
Peter Hudis, how did this event come to be? I know it's a kind of a national tour, but how did you get involved with it? And how did you end up bringing them to Chicago?
Well, last year in 2022, Yulia Yurichenko, who is a very important book on Ukraine, she's Ukrainian herself, teaches in London, was an exile from Ukraine, gave a talk at the Socialism 2022 conference on the Ukrainian struggle, about opposition to Putin's invasion, etc. And it was a really wonderful talk that she gave. Afterwards, a number of us got together with her, and we discussed following through from her talk to try to show how can we in the United States build solidarity with the struggle against Putin's invasion at a time when many in the left are refraining from doing this for various reasons. And so from that, at her inspiration, within a few months, we helped form a new organization called the Ukraine Solidarity Network, which is progressive activists in the United States. It includes Bill Fletcher, for instance, who I think you know. It includes Barbara Smith, the co-founder of the Combahee River Collective. It includes Howie Hawkins, who was the Green Party candidate for president back in 2000, and a number of other prominent left activists and academics and scholars came together, and we've been involved in various activities over the past 8 months or so in developing solidarity actions with Ukraine. And as part of that, we decided to try to do a national tour of the Ukrainian and Russian spokespersons that we were in contact with, both inside and outside of Ukraine. And so a national tour was organized, which is going to start here in Chicago. The three of them are first going to speak at the Socialism 2023 conference at McCormick Place on September 3rd. And then on September 5th, they're going to speak at Loyola. That's going to be an open meeting, free admission, etc. Then they're going to head to New York, and they're going to be giving a talk there, and then heading to the West Coast and be speaking in the Bay Area. They unfortunately can't stay in the U.S. except for Dennis Banda for too long. So that will be the 3 cities of the tour, but it'll be a really momentous event, this tour.
Fill us in a little bit on where the left in this country is at on Ukraine. I know I've had some friends who've been on the show who are pretty critical of Biden and the invasion, other people who are supporting it. You know, I got to say, without knowing a lot of the details about more recent politics in Ukraine, I just kind of vehemently am in opposition to Putin and Russia. I did visit the Soviet Union back in the day. I think they played a really important part in world history, but they've been an imperialist power in many ways and pretty negative. But I also know that Ukraine has a history of some pretty right-wing activity in their own past. Give us a little overview from your perspective as a leftist.
Yes, there's no question that Ukraine has a very checkered history, but we should keep in mind that much of the propaganda that is coming from Putin, that Ukraine is a Nazi government, that it's predominantly fascist or right-wingers, far right-wingers, etc., or, which of course Putin argues, Ukraine has no right to exist. It was never really meant to be an independent country. He blames Lenin for creating Ukraine as a semi-independent member of the Soviet Union and quasi-independent, and wants to erase that independence. I think this is unfortunate that this kind of propaganda in line of Putin has, among many in the left, been adopted and accepted, even when they oppose or criticize Putin's invasion. For instance, you hear very often, well, the Ukrainian government is a fascistic government. It's simply not true. The far right, there is a far right wing in Ukraine, and that's a dangerous force. In the last presidential elections, the far right won 3.2% of the popular vote. In a popular vote in which 70% of the population voted for a right of center candidate, equivalent to basically Macron in France, or even maybe Biden in America, Zelensky, who got 70% of the vote. Now, you realize the far right in Germany, Alternative for Deutschland, gets a lot more than 3.2% of the vote. The National Front in France gets more than 3.2%. The neo-fascists and the fascists in many European countries are far larger than in Ukraine. So when I tell people, well, wait a second, you say the government of Ukraine is full of fascists, could you name me some of them? And they can't, because there aren't any, okay? So we have to avoid buying these kind of myths. A second myth is that the 2014 Maidan Square protest that brought down Putin's ally, who's an oligarch running Ukraine and an ally of the Kremlin, and pushed out him in favor of a more democratic leader, that this was a right-wing CIA-inspired or even NATO-inspired virtual coup d'etat. This is not true. The 2014 Maidan movement came out of the Occupy movement that started in the United States. It was inspired by the same kinds of basic principles. And yes, it had many people who were part of it, some left-wing, some right-wing, some moderate, some undecided. But it was a citizens' movement to democratize Ukraine. This is why Putin has invaded Ukraine, not because NATO is on his borders. NATO's been on his borders, has expanded its borders 20 years ago, and he didn't start a war. What he's terrified about is the spread of democracy. That's why he invaded Kazakhstan last year. He invaded Belarus last year. In both places, there were strong democratic movements that he helped crush. There was a democratic or quasi-democratic government in Ukraine, a flawed democratic government, but that's a threat to Putin because he doesn't want that democracy spilling off into Russia in any way. That's why he invaded, to put an end to these even limited efforts of expressions of democracy. So the unfortunate thing is a lot of people on the left, even prominent figures like Noam Chomsky or Medea Benjamin, have failed to come out unreservedly in support of the fact that Ukrainians are now all united, fighting for their lives against Russia. And they're not worried about NATO right now, nor understandably, they're worried about the bombs falling on them from Moscow.
Peter, what's your sense of how the war is going? I saw a piece today talked about Putin feeling the pinch a little bit from the sanctions. For a while, it seemed like he kept rolling. But what's your sense of where the war is going? I know that we have this advance by the Ukrainian troops. It's slow. It's succeeding. It's not succeeding. I'm a little confused. I'd love to hear it. I did visit. I want to say it before I forget. I did visit the Ukraine when I went to the Soviet Union with Athletes United for Peace. I played baseball in Donetsk. I hit a double, and it was dreary and gray over there in the Ukraine then. And I'm not just talking the weather. I'm just talking the vibe. What's your sense of where the war is at and what we might expect?
Very good. Well, first of all, I would have to say Ukraine is largely considered to be the global south within the global north. It's the poorest part of Europe, especially Western Ukraine, and has been the poorest part of Europe for many, many decades. In terms of how the war is going, though, I should say that, well, first of all, Putin thought he was going to win this war in a couple of days or a few weeks, right? And Ukrainians put up a spirited resistance. When I say the Ukrainians, I'm not speaking just of Ukrainian-speaking Ukrainians. I'm talking about the significant number of Russian-speaking Ukrainians in Ukraine. They have overwhelmingly supported the Zelensky government's military operation, defense of Ukraine against Russia. There's been not a single battalion of Russian-speaking soldiers that have defected over to the Russian side. Now, the war has not, since they held back the Russians, which nobody expected the Ukrainians could do, and that was before the United States sent them significant military aid, or NATO sent them much aid. There's been more of a stalemate because it's easier to fight defensively very often than offensively, of course, right? One of the handicaps, so the war is going more difficultly for the Ukrainian side now than it was last year. One of the reasons it's going more difficultly, however, is that despite all the talk about some people act like, well, the United States has just opened the piggy bank for the Ukrainians and sending them every weapon imaginable. In fact, they still have not sent them fighter planes. Now, in modern warfare, how do you win or even defend yourself against an invader without air force, without air superiority? And the lack of that support, even now, Biden has recently said, well, we're going to give them F-16s, but they first have to learn English. They first have to get training. It's not going to show up in another 2 years. That doesn't help them now. Only recently did they get advanced U.S. tanks from NATO or from the United States. So they've been at a severe disadvantage. It's amazing the Ukrainians have done as good as they have, given the extreme limitations they're under. So the problem is not they've been overwhelmed with arms from the Western powers. The Western powers have been grudgingly giving them here or there, but what they really need is actually elements of military support like air power that they're basically having to create on their own, more or less. So what I'm hopeful, however, the thing that the Ukrainians have going for them, even though they're deficient in a lot of weapons and such, is that they're defending their own country. The Russian soldiers don't know what they're fighting for. Their morale is terrible. The Ukrainians know what they're fighting for. They're fighting for their lives. They know that if Putin takes over Ukraine, it's going to be they're not going to be able to breathe, and they're not going to have a national existence anymore. And so, in a certain sense, the fate of democracy in that part of the world depends on Ukraine coming out on top of the struggle.
Peter Hudis, this is really good, and I learned a lot more than I knew. I didn't know enough, and I'd like to invite you back ahead of time to give us another report. But give us one more time the information on the event that's happening on Tuesday night. Who's coming, where it's at, and what time to be there.
Okay, so show up Tuesday night, September 5th, this coming Tuesday at 6:30 p.m. at Loyola University Lakeshore campus, 6511 Sheridan Road. It's in the Damen Student Center Cinema, Damen Student Center Cinema at 6:30 on Tuesday, September 5th. The three speakers are Hanna Perikova, Ilya Butrykskis, and Dennis Bondar. And this is going to be, the meeting is entitled Resisting Russian Imperialism, Ukraine's Struggle for Self-Determination. It will be an open forum. Each one of the three speakers will speak, and there'll be a discussion period. It's being sponsored by the Theology Department, Philosophy, Sociology, Global Studies, the Peace and Conflict Studies Program, and the Center of International Research at Loyola. There's a lot of folks at Loyola who came together to make this event possible, and we really thank Loyola University for doing the work to make this meeting come into being.
Well, I hope to see you there, and I hope to have you back on the show talking more Ukraine and filling us in a little bit about, for a lot of the people who don't know who Frantz Fanon was, because that was a good book that you put together. Thanks so much.
Thank you, and I'll be glad. Thank you. I'll be glad to come back anytime.
Right on, brother.